The Arab Spring, as it became known, has seen the outbreak of protest and democracy across the Middle East and North Africa. But it also presented President Obama with a unique challenge: how to support the various movements, which governments to help overthrow, which to help stabilise. And in the case of Libya, the president acted far more forcefully and assertively than many of his critics perhaps realise. That's the conclusion of a story just published in the latest edition of Rolling Stone magazine. And with us now is the writer and contributing editor, Michael Hastings. Good afternoon, Mike. You write that Libya was the first war that President Obama started on his own.
Right.
Are you suggesting, therefore, that his role as commander-in-chief has evolved since he became president?
Yes, exactly. I considered Libya and also the operation against Osama bin Laden as sort of the president's blank slate foreign policy opportunities, right? It's his staff who created the operations, who made the plans, and he himself made the decisions. And as we've seen, when the president has made his decisions on his own foreign policy, they've been quite wise, and it turns out quite strongly. I mean, I'll be honest, when I first heard we were going to intervene in Libya, I said to myself, okay, 6 months from now I'm going to do a story, America's latest mess in the Middle East. But that's not the case.
Absolutely. Now, one of the contrasts you draw in your particular article is between the president's conduct and leadership on foreign affairs as compared to domestic issues. But why do you think there is this contrast, aside from the fact that we have a do-nothing Congress?
Well, I think a do-nothing Congress is part of it. You have more power in the presidency. You can really once you make the decisive decision, you have the entire weight of our national security state behind you.
But is the president more himself on foreign policy or more himself domestically?
That's a great question. I mean, I would say that the president at heart is an intellectual. He's not one of these cowboy, gonna kick him in the butt, ride to the sunset kind of guy. He's going to look at both sides of the debate. He's going to absorb this information, then he's going to act. Now, he does that in domestic policy and foreign policy, but when he does that in foreign policy, he can do it, right? Does in domestic policy, all of a sudden he runs into these jerks in Congress.
Indeed. Defense Secretary Robert Gates argued until the end against intervention in Libya, as you know, fearing a stalemate. Yet President Obama took what I think could be described as a moral and humanitarian approach. Did he do that, do you think, because he was mindful of what happened with President Clinton and Rwanda, where we know a genocide occurred? I went to Rwanda. I walked into a church where there were 326 dead bodies as a result of nobody intervening. Was that what was in President Obama's mind?
That's exactly what it was. He had put key advisors around him: Samantha Powers, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton herself, who were seared by the Rwanda experience, as you described it, this sort of failure of the West to act. And the president was very interested in these things himself, and when he had an opportunity to say, look, I get what you're saying, Secretary Gates. Libya may not be a vital national interest, but it's the right thing to do. Now, me being the cynical journalist type, I'm like, oh, yeah, right. How can that actually be true? But I truly believe that when the president was given an opportunity where he thought he could save some lives and could get us on the right side of history in terms of the Arab Spring, he took that chance against his military advisors.
Absolutely, against Robert Gates. Why did he choose to do that in Libya and not in Syria?
Well, and now here is the one caveat to the entire humanitarian argument, right? When our principles match up with our interests, we're happy to make the principle
right.
And so that is the sort of undercuts the good news story. But I think the reality of American power and the reality of the Washington D.C. bipartisan national security consensus is that it's a Democrat Republican. They both sort of think the same thing. And so when you're choosing a leader, because I've thought about this in going into 2012, do you want a leader who's going to be relying on multilateral institutions like the United Nations, or do you want one that thinks the United Nations should be,
disbanded?
Exactly. And I think that's really important.
How much do you think the president's willingness to stand alongside NATO, not put American troops on the ground, but resource some of the attacks on Gaddafi, how much has that improved America's standing overseas, do you think?
I think it was huge. I mean, I've talked to people who are in close contact with the Libyan rebels, even Islamist elements of the rebels, who are saying really positive things about the United States. Now, look, Does that mean they're going to continue to say positive things about the United States? No, but I think, especially after decades of our role in the Middle East has been so corrupt. I mean, let's just be honest, right?
Corrupt?
Corrupt in terms of supporting regimes that have not had a good track record on human rights. Dictatorships, exactly. And to move away from that is not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take time. And to be able to do it, Libya is a first step, or at least that's how the administration sees it.
You report on a meeting on March the 18th in which the president invited 18 congressional leaders to the Oval Office and simply announced what he was going to do. And one staffer, you quote, and I'm reading from you, it says, it wasn't a consultation. Isn't that, I mean, is that a break with this style of, you were just describing, of an intellectual who likes to weigh all the opinions? Here's a man who goes to a meeting, invites these people and says, this is what I'm going to do.
Right, and it angered Congress tremendously. These congressional sources I spoke to were furious that the president did this. So on the one hand, they're accusing him of waffling.
Right.
On the other hand, they're saying, well, he just went ahead and did this.
Right.
So it's sort of like make up your mind. I think this gets back to the idea that the imperial presidency, the president wanting to maintain the power of the office to act when he wants to act in terms of making foreign policy decisions. Congress was out of session that day.
Some would say conveniently.
Conveniently. Yeah, and as someone I spoke to who was very close to the rebels said, well, I'm not going to, it was expletive Congress in terms of like, Congress just wants to make a show of doing something, but they wouldn't have really stopped it anyway, and it would have been more of this sort of kabuki theater. As a citizen of a democracy, look, I'd prefer that before we go to war or take military action, we consult with our own legislative bodies. But again, within this context, I think the president felt that he needed to act without a long, drawn-out debate.
Michael Hastings, contributing editor of Rolling Stone, thank you very much for joining us.